Following the sad news that former light welterweight and welterweight champion Ricky Hatton had passed away earlier in the week, I thought it would be a good time to do a tribute career review video on Ricky Hatton's career. So I've got his box rec page up here and just be going through Hatton's career from the beginning all the way to the end in 2012. So Hatton made his debut in 1997. He was 18 years of age. And like with a lot of these career reviews, the debut fight is not particularly interesting as it's against an overmatched opponent, which is expected with a fighter starting out his career. They're trying to build up his confidence, so they're not going to put him in there with anyone who potentially might beat him. And Ricky Hatton was no different. He fought a guy with 8 wins and 48 defeats. Nothing significant, particularly about this bout. He then followed up in 97 and fought his second professional fight, and that fight did have some significance. And the significance of that fight was, as you can see on BoxRec, it was in Madison Square Garden, New York. And this was actually on the undercard of Prince Nassim Hamid against Kevin Kelly. Just click here into the events and it should bring up, yep, Nassim Hamid versus Kevin Kelly. That was the headline fight. You also had Kennedy McKinney and Junior Jones. I believe that was for a bantamweight title, super bantamweight, sorry. Yeah, that was for the WBO super bantamweight title. So yeah, Ricky Hatton in his only his second professional fight was on the undercard of Prince Nassim Hamid, and that's obviously because he was also promoted by Frank Warren, and Frank Warren also promoted Prince Nassim, so they thought they'd get a bit of exposure in the US market. Hatton won that fight by unanimous decision. Again, not really a fight with anything significant that happened. The next fight on Hatton's career, if you just bear with me, all these adverts just keep popping up, was Tommy Peacock. And that was for the British Central Area super lightweight title at £140. It was in the Sports Centre in Oldham, and Hatton won it by second round stoppage. Now, Hatton at this time would have been around 20 years of age, and that's a pretty good achievement, you know, for fighters, for fans who might be wondering what area level is like. That's pretty much, I would say, around someone like Tommy Fury's level, maybe even a bit above. So Ricky Hatton at the age of 20 was winning a not a world title, an area level title, and he won it in very good fashion. He stopped the guy in 2 rounds. So you could already see from there that Ricky Hatton had some potential and could go on to do big things. After that, he had a lot of fights. They were all pretty much in the UK. And one thing to note about Ricky Hatton is he was quite a unique fighter in the sense that the way his fan base got built was very different to how anyone else's fan base got built. Especially back in those days in boxing, the 90s, the 2000s, the 80s. If you really wanted to build a fan base, you had to go to the Olympics and get exposure to national TV, whether that would be in the UK through BBC or in America through something like ABC or NBC. But with Ricky Hatton, he actually built a lot of his fan base locally, and he was able to do that because his parents owned a pub and they were quite well known within the community. I believe his granddad and his dad played for Manchester City at a junior level. So he came from a sporting background. His family owned a pub. They were well known within the community, and that allowed Hatton to grow this fan base out of Manchester. And it's quite different to today's boxing, where you don't really see that. In today's boxing, it's shifted away from, winning an Olympic medal to win your fan base, to using social media and doing more of what guys like Jake Paul are doing. And that's probably the best way to build yourself. But yeah, that was Ricky Hatton. He then fought again in America against Gilbert Quiros. And he ended up actually in this fight getting a pretty bad cut over his eye. And it was caused by a punch. And that was in the first round. And in the second round, you could see Ricky Hatton was in a hurry to finish it, because had he not stopped Quiros in the second round, and he did so with a fantastic body shot, he would have potentially had a loss on his record at a very early stage. And when something like that happens, the whole trajectory of a fighter's career changes. And it's just interesting to see, because had he lost that fight, Hatton may never have gone on to achieve what he achieved. Although he didn't really do too much wrong. Yeah, he got cut. And as a side note, Hatton was very prone to cuts throughout his career. He in several of his major fights, he had cuts. And I guess this was the first time that it happened to him. And he managed to get the stoppage. He knew he had to get the stoppage because it was a very bad cut, and they could have stopped that fight. And it would have resulted in Hatton having a loss very early on in his career, and probably changing the trajectory of his career, and probably for the worst. I don't know why it's gone into the events. Yeah, so that was Hatton. After that, he went on to win the British title against John Faxton, and he ended up getting cut in this fight as well. It was a good fight between Hatton and Faxton. Hatton won the fight pretty comfortably. Faxton's style was made for Ricky Hatton, and he was quite comfortable in there. But it also showed the vulnerability that Hatton has in terms of getting cut, and beating Faxton was just another step in Hatton's career to go on and fight for the big titles. This was kind of an interesting sort of point where Hatton, he didn't really sort of defend his British title. He went on and won a version of a world title. So Hatton actually won a world title at 21, but he didn't win a major world title. He won what was known as the WBU belt in the super lightweight division. And this sanctioning body was only around from 1995 to 2004. Another fighter who won this belt was Audley Harrison, but no one really considered Audley Harrison a world champion, because the WBU belt is not a major sanctioning body. Hatton won it against Tony Pep, who also was a former Floyd Mayweather opponent, managed to stop him within 4 rounds. And along a large part of this portion of Ricky Hatton's career was fighting the WBU world title. And to be quite frank about it, he wasn't fighting elite level light welterweights. He was fighting guys like Freddie Pendleton, who I believe was a pretty good fighter, but was past his best, 25 losses, 47 wins. He was beating guys like Justin Roswell, and he was having his own way with all of these guys until he got to Eamon McGee. So here we look at the fight with Eamon McGee, and we see that Ricky Hatton in the first round was dropped by Eamon McGee. Now, Eamon McGee was a guy that people expected Ricky Hatton to get past. He was better than a lot of these other guys that we see down here that he was defending the WBU title against, but he was still fully expected to beat an Eamon McGee. Eamon McGee was an Irish fighter. He was a solid fighter. He wasn't a world level or an elite fighter. He was a southpaw. And that brings me on to the next point about Ricky Hatton's career, which was that Hatton struggled against southpaws. We'll go on to the Manny Pacquiao fight later on in this video, but this is kind of a, foreshadowing of the difficulties that Ricky Hatton would have against southpaw fighters. Eamon McGree caught Ricky Hatton. He was actually backed up on the ropes, Miggy, and Hatton was overly aggressive, and he got caught with a right hook and he went down. Now, whenever an orthodox fighter fights a southpaw or southpaw fights an orthodox, I always feel like an overly aggressive fighter, whether it's the orthodox or the southpaw, the counter puncher has the advantage. I just think the angles and the way they're set up when you're reaching for punches in an orthodox stance against the southpaw, it leaves you open to getting hit, because the jab is a lot more difficult to land. So if you're a pressure fighter and you're fighting a guy from the opposite stance, you're overreaching with your power hand because you can't really measure him with the jab, and that leaves you susceptible to their counter shots. So I've always had this theory that when an orthodox fighter fights a southpaw or vice versa, you'd rather be the counter puncher than the aggressor when two opposite-handed fighters are fighting each other. And you see that, and I believe there is, a bit of empirical evidence to support that, rather than the sort of theory that I hold for that. But yeah, he went on, he fought it out, and Hatton showed heart, in this fight. He got up off the canvas. He continued to apply the pressure. He wasn't discouraged. A lot of guys, when they get dropped in their first time, you really find out what they're about. Do they have the minerals at this level? Do they just collapse because they got hit and thrown off their game plan? But this was a fight that showed us that Ricky Hatton does have the heart. Even if you put him down, he's going to get back up and he's going to keep pressuring you. And that's what he did to McGee. And he won a decision. He went on really continuing to basically defend that WBU belt. And he did that for quite a few years, Ricky Hatton. He went on to fight Vince Phillip, who was past his best, but Vince Phillip was a light welterweight champion. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Freddie Pendleton wasn't champion. So that was Ricky Hatton's second former champion that he fought at light welterweight. He beat him by unanimous decision. Vince Phillips obviously took the undefeated record of Costa Tszyu in a massive upset. He actually stopped Costa Tszyu in a pretty bad fashion. And he was a good fighter, but he was past his best. And, Hatton at this stage, he didn't have a very deep amateur background. So it was understandable as he held this WBU belt to build himself and fight guys like Vince Phillips and Ben Taki. Not bad fighters, but just not the sort of fighters you would expect a champion to fight. But you've got to be fair to Ricky Hatton in the sense that he wasn't holding a major world title. He wasn't holding the WBC belt. And we'll see subsequently in this video, when Hatton did pick up a major world title, he did then go on and fight the top guys around his division. Pretty much more of the same until we got to Costa Tszyu, which is obviously the most significant moment in the whole of Hatton's career. It was in the MEN arena. This fight was a fight where, outside of Hatton's legion of fans, no one was really giving him a chance. I think Hatton was a 7-1 underdog in this fight. It was in front of a packed out MEN arena, and Ricky Hatton just fought out of his skin this night. I mean, he showed so much heart and determination against a guy who was probably superior than him in terms of skill, if we're going to be honest about it. But Hatton just imposed his will on Costa Tszyu that night. He was just not going to be denied. He walked through his best punches. He got into the range that he needed to get into to land his body shots, to land his uppercuts, and really just took the fight out of Tszyu And Zoo ended up quitting on his stall. I mean, a proud champion like Costa Zoo, to make him quit on his stall. People will obviously talk about stuff like low blows and rabbit punches, but it's a professional boxing match. And this wasn't the dirtiest performance from Hatton. Yeah, he wasn't the cleanest fighter out there, but someone like Floyd Mayweather wasn't the cleanest fighter out there. So we can't hold that against Ricky Hatton because he threw a few shots that maybe strayed a little bit low. But then again, who's to say if they were intentional or not? In any case, he ended up stopping Zoo. Zoo retired on his stool. Hatton dropped to his knees, and you could just see the ecstasy through his whole body. I mean, it was a moment that, when I think back on fighters winning world titles, that just leaves an imprint on your mind because you see how much it meant to Ricky Hatton. So up to this point, Hatton then actually won the Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year in 2005, which is a incredible performance because there's so few British fighters who have won the Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year. So after that, he went on, he fought Carlos Mauser. I believe that was in Sheffield. Yes, it was in Sheffield. He stopped Mauser with a devastating left hook. It was a relatively easy fight. I mean, Mauser was a good fighter, but when Mauser got to world level, he never really offered much resistance. I mean, I think he was stopped in a round by Victor Ortiz. But yeah, Hatton just had too much desire. And that's another point about Ricky Hatton. When you look at his great qualities, he had extremely fast feet. So unless you were a very good boxer and had very good footwork and counter-punching ability, he would close the distance on you and make you fight his fight. Right? He also had very good ability to cut angles on the inside and get body shots in around the elbows, in the pit of the stomach. There's a really good video, I think, done by like Sky Sports, where Ricky Hatton breaks down how he gets his body shots off and how he switches and uses his angles and pivots to either get around the elbows or get in the pit of the stomach. He was honestly one of the best body punchers Britain's ever produced. Probably the best British body puncher ever. And one of the best British body punchers of recent times. Had extremely fast feet, had a good chin, had unbelievable heart and will and determination, Ricky Hatton. That was one thing you always knew you were going to get. He fought 3 minutes of every round, and he gave, in every fight, Ricky Hatton gave it his all. He left nothing in the ring. And I think that it's not just the tangibles when you look at Ricky Hatton. Yeah, he had very fast feet. Yeah, he was a very good body puncher. It's the intangibles that made Ricky Hatton beat Costa Zoo that night. It wasn't just skills. And Hatton was a skilled guy. He was a skilled fighter on the inside. I don't want people to misunderstand that and just think it was all heart and determination that made Ricky Hatton a world champion. It was a lot more than that. But moving on to the next guy on the list, which is Luis Collazo. And Hatton, again, fought in America in, where was this fight in America? Boston, at the TD Gardens. Hatton dropped Collazo in the first round. Collazo, again, was a southpaw. And after Hatton dropped him in the first round, Collazo was a southpaw, and he was also a very good fighter on the inside. And he was also a natural welterweight. Hatton wasn't able to have the success he had on the inside like he did at light welterweight with those other guys who were a lot smaller than Collazo. And it became apparent that as successful as Hatton has been at light welterweight, given Hatton's style, and this is another sort of general point that I feel like in boxing, whenever you have a fighter who uses their physicality, another great example of this is Josh Taylor. they use their physicality and their size and that's made them successful at, say, a particular weight division. When they move up, it's very hard for them to replicate that success. It's a lot easier for a counter puncher or a more pure boxer as they move up in weight to deal with bigger guys. Because if you rely on strength and you rely on infighting, when you go up to fight bigger guys, those attributes aren't gonna translate as well. Because how are you gonna outfight a bigger guy on the inside? But if you're a skilled guy, if you're a boxer, even if you're a smaller guy, you can use your speed and your movement and you can outbox these bigger guys. So, like I said, Josh Taylor's another very good example of that. Even someone like Antonio Margarito. Imagine him at 168 or 160. He couldn't do what he did. But if you look at other guys who are skilled pure boxers, they can move up through the weight classes. Hatton ended up winning this fight. It was a very close fight. He was actually hurt badly by Collazo, and it was nip and tuck. It was really a war of attrition where they fought on the inside mainly. There wasn't no boxing at long range. I think Hatton did just enough with the knockdown to win it, but probably by a point. After this fight, Hatton moved down to 140 pounds, and that was a very wise decision from Ricky Hatton because he just wasn't the same level of fighter at 147. It was clear as day. He was never going to be as successful at 147 as he was at 140. He fought Juan Durango, and just to add in a point there, Hatton beats Collazo and he becomes a 2-weight world champion. Not many fighters from the UK achieved that. So a very good achievement for Ricky Hatton, multi-weight 2-time world champion. But then he comes back down and he wins another world title. He wins back his old belt, the belt that he won against Costa Zoo, which then became vacant when he moved up. He wins that back against Juan Durango in a very one-sided fight. Durango, another good, solid guy at the world level, but, he could never really crack the top 5. He was tough and he had a good chin, but he never really had the style to give Hatton problems. He wasn't a boxer, and he was never going to beat Hatton on the inside. So Hatton ended up beating Durango, fights Jose Luis Castillo, ends that fight with a sickening body shot at 140. To be fair, Castillo had seen better days. But it's still a very good name to have on your resume, Luis Castillo. He then went on and fought a major fight against Floyd Mayweather Jr. And this fight took place at 147 pounds. Now, I believe that Mayweather knew that seeing the Hatton performance against Luis Collazo, that he could beat Ricky Hatton. Remember, Hatton didn't look very impressive at 147. Another thing to notice is Hatton came in at 145 pounds, and Hatton, this fight meant so much to Ricky Hatton, and you can see that in the HBO series 24/7. I remember at the time that this fight was happening, watching that 4-part series, and you could see for Ricky Hatton this fight meant so much, whereas for Floyd Mayweather it didn't mean as much. It was just another fight for him, and I think that's why Hatton came in at 145. Maybe he might have overtrained. Not saying it would have had an impact on the outcome of the fight, but when you're coming in at 145 pounds, and if you look at Hatton against Collazo, he came in at the full 147 pounds. So maybe he overtrained for this fight. This fight took place in America, and honestly, it was one of the biggest transatlantic fights involving a British fighter. It really was. I don't think there'll ever be another British fighter who takes over as many fans as Ricky Hatton did when he fought Floyd Mayweather. It was just insane. Like, that atmosphere, will never be replicated by any British fighter going over to America. Ever. I just can't see it. It was if you watch that fight back and you watch the ring walk of Ricky Hatton, you could have fooled me that he was fighting in Manchester. Honestly, the reception was just absurd for someone fighting away from home, and it brings back to the fan base that Ricky Hatton had. I mean, the people supporting Ricky Hatton, even if they didn't know him, it was almost as though they did. He had a special fan base that I don't think any other fighter can replicate. And getting now to the actual fight, Ricky Hatton displayed in the first round that he could give Floyd Mayweather problems. His foot speed made Floyd Mayweather move more than he wanted to, and this brings back to the point that I was talking about earlier about Ricky Hatton's foot speed and how his foot speed is basically unusual for a guy who is a pressure fighter. And when you normally think of pressure fighters, you have guys like Antonio Margarito. They're very slow-footed, like your Miguel Cotto's. I mean, Cotto actually had better footwork and was actually a bit more of a boxer puncher. But a lot of times when you have a pressure fighter who's very physically strong, they don't have fast feet. Hatton had incredibly fast feet. And those fast feet were giving Floyd Mayweather problems. And it brings me back to the point, especially at 140 pounds, very hard for anyone to beat Ricky Hatton unless they had exceptional boxing skill, because he was going to cut off the ring and make you fight his fight. And he was going to fight 3 minutes of every round. And it's very unlikely you were going to beat Ricky Hatton in a battle of attrition. But of course, Floyd Mayweather was an exceptional boxer. And he did have a little bit of help from the referee in Joe Cortez. So even though Hatton got off to a good start in this fight, he was walking onto clean shots on the back foot by Floyd. Floyd was landing a lead straight hand on Ricky Hatton, a check left hook as Ricky Hatton was coming in. And they weren't having an impact immediately, but over time that punishment accumulates up. For the first 4 or 5 rounds, it was nip and tuck. Hatton was having his moments in there. But Mayweather was conserving his energy a lot better than Hatton was. He was being more efficient. Hatton was fighting an emotional fight, and Floyd Mayweather was fighting a strategical fight. He was picking his shots. And that's another point, I think. Was Hatton maybe a little bit too much riled up for this fight? You know, he came in at 145 pounds. Did he overtrain? You know, sometimes we think you just got to train, but you've got to balance it out. You've got to have your rest days. You know, you can't overtrain yourself. You leave it in the ring, you know. And Hatton with how much heart he had and how much tenacity he had, he was the sort of guy who could leave it in the gym. You know, but getting back to the fight, Hatton had his moments of success. He had a very good first round. He actually caught Mayweather off balance and has sent him reeling. But he was also getting hit by a lot of clean shots. He did land a very good body shot in round 1, but couldn't really follow up on that. And I think a lot of that was because Joe Cortez didn't let him fight on the inside. You know? Joe Cortez, the referee in that fight, wasn't great. And Ricky Hatton would have probably done a lot better if there was a referee in there who did let him fight on the inside. Again, not saying he would have won the fight, but it definitely would have helped. As the fight went on, Floyd stood his ground more, and I think that was a strategy from Floyd. He knew early, I'm not going to fight this guy on the inside. He's got too much tenacity. He's going to have a bit too much steam on his shots. I'll box him on the back foot. I'll pot shot him. I'll counter punch him. After 6 rounds, when he's frustrated and he's a little bit more worn down, then I'll stand and actually take the fight to him a bit. And that's what Floyd did. And after about the second half of the fight, it was becoming a bit more of a gap between Floyd and Hatton. I mean, Hatton never stopped trying, and until the last moments of that fight. He gave it his all. But he just wasn't landing clean enough on Floyd, and Floyd was. And it was starting to there was starting to be a gap between the two fighters after the midway point. Floyd in round 9 displayed a brilliant jab. I mean, Floyd Mayweather in round 9. I mean, if you watch round 9 of that fight, and Floyd doesn't always use his jab a lot. I mean, his jab was absolutely phenomenal in round 9. I mean, he was so accurate. And I think he was just having a breather off round. And that's the thing about Floyd. He knew the right time to do the right things. He knew when to use his jab and just, take a round off, but still win the round. Not even take the round off and lose it. Take the round off, not throw many power punches, conserve your energy. Came out in round 10, but proceeding round 9 actually is quite crucial. Round 8 was a very big round for Floyd Mayweather. He had Hatton up on the ropes and he was landing a lot of power shots. Hatton was eating a lot of clean shots. Then obviously, like I said, in round 9, Floyd, brilliant jab, was really just out jabbing Hatton. And then in round 10, Floyd lands a brilliant check hook on Hatton. And Hatton would do something where he would dip down to his left and almost like telegraph a punch from his left hand. But as he would do that, he would be so wide open from the right hand side. And I believe Floyd Mayweather picked up on that and landed a left hook. He actually landed it a few times before, but this time he really caught Hatton. So as Hatton dipped to his left and kind of was leaping in with a punch, Floyd Mayweather on the back foot pivoted off with a check left hook and caught Hatton coming in. And Hatton fell into the ring post and he went down. He got back up, showing the heart that he always shows. But Floyd went in for the finish and put Hatton down again, and Joe Cortez waved off the fight. That was probably, and I remember I was a lot younger than one of the fights that I was rooting for Hatton, to be honest. I've never been as disappointed in the sporting result. One of them, probably most times I've been disappointed in the sporting result was that fight there, because you just wanted Hatton to win. Just everything about him compared to Floyd as an individual would make you want to root for Hatton over Floyd. And don't get me wrong, Floyd's a tremendous fighter, like I've just said. But, if you're talking personality-wise, I'm taking Ricky Hatton over Floyd Mayweather all day long. But yeah, Floyd was a little bit too good for him. Not sure if the fight would have been different with a different ref, to be honest. Floyd probably still would have won. Not sure if they fought at 140, if the fight would have been much different, to be honest, as well. Maybe Hatton would have done a little bit better, but I think ultimately there were things I think Hatton could have improved on in that performance. Not technically, but I just feel like he was just a little bit too emotional and too... He just wasn't going into the fight with a cool head like Floyd was. But yeah, Hatton had a comeback fight against Juan Lezcano in the Manchester Stadium. It was a fight against Lezcano, who was really a lightweight, moved up. It was just a homecoming fight. I mean, in fact, that's how it was promoted. Hatton sold out the whole stadium, just showing you how much of a fan base that he had. Hatton goes on and leaves Billy Graham after the Juan Lezcano fight and goes with Floyd Mayweather Sr. And he fights Ricky Hatton and he looks good. He fights Paulie Malignaggi, who actually is a world champion, the IBO world champion, not a major world title, but still a world title nonetheless. Fought him in Las Vegas in the MGM Grand, and Hatton just overpowered Malignaggi, to be honest. Malignaggi had a decent first round. He landed some good jabs, but he just had nothing to hold Ricky Hatton off. And he was not really an inside fighter. So once Hatton closed the distance, Malignaggi just didn't really have any answers. Hatton just basically overpowered Malignaggi more than anything else in this fight. First fight under Floyd Senior, and Hatton actually looked really good under Floyd Senior in his first fight, but you wonder how much of that was Floyd Senior and how much of that was Ricky Hatton just being on autopilot from what he learned from Billy Graham, because the fight after that was the Manny Pacquiao fight, and that fight was another fight that was where Hatton and Floyd Mayweather Senior was training him, but he didn't have the same success that he had in the Malignaggi fight. Hatton, as I said, his Achilles heel was the southpaw stance. Unless you were a great boxer like Floyd in an orthodox stance, you were going to have a tough night against Hatton. But being so overly aggressive against against Pacquiao, he was just walking onto shots. He walked onto a right hook, walked onto a straight left hand, and Hatton wasn't landing as cleanly. He was trying to rough Pacquiao up and get on the inside, but he had to go through a place before he could get on the inside against Pacquiao. And that place he was going through, he was walking onto a lot of counter shots. He just couldn't close the distance without taking too many clean shots from Manny Pacquiao. He went down in the first round with a right hook, and that's another thing with Hatton. He was throwing very wide shots, and Pacquiao was beating him with the shorter punches and beating him to the punch. As Hatton was telegraphing these shots, he was throwing the shorter punches, beat him to the punch and dropped him. Got back up, Ricky Hatton shows that tremendous heart. And then Manny Pacquiao put him down again before the first round was over. He got back to his corner. Floyd Mayweather was reading him the riot act, but wasn't really giving him any technical information. I mean, in a situation like that, it's very difficult what you're going to say to a fighter, because it just looks like stylistically it's a wrong matchup for Ricky. You'd probably just say move your head a bit more and try to get on the inside and get on his chest without taking too many punches. But that's easier said than done. Maybe you could have tried a crab defense whilst you're closing the distance. I mean, it would leave your body open, but at least you'd have your head protected, and then you can get on the inside without taking too many clean headshots. But Hatton, never really employed that sort of a defense. Second round was a little bit better from Hatton, and he did land actually a good right hand on Pacquiao that moved him, but Pacquiao was just still the cleaner puncher. Hatton wasn't the cleanest of puncher. He would get on the inside. He had a very good left hook to the body, and he would kind of rough you up. He wasn't a clean, sharp shooter, precise puncher. And Pacquiao was, and that was really the difference in the fight. Hatton, again, kept his right side, kept his guard down, and Pacquiao just detonated a huge left hand in the second round and stopped him. I mean, it was sad to see Ricky get taken out like that. But Pacquiao at that time was the best pound for pound. I mean, he lost to Floyd at this point when he was number one pound for pound, and he lost to Manny Pacquiao when he was number one pound for pound. And that was the end for Ricky Hatton, or so we thought, and he probably shouldn't have made the comeback against Shevchenko. Again, this fight was at welterweight, and Hatton didn't have great success at welterweight. A lot of his best moments was at 140, and he was actually doing well in this fight, Hatton, but you could see in this Shevchenko fight, which took place 3.5 years later, that his timing was off, and although he was winning the rounds and having success, it was pretty competitive in there. Shevchenko was having his moments. Ultimately, Ricky Hatton got hit with a devastating body shot in the 9th round, and that was it. You know, it was unfortunate. And even if Hatton had won this fight, I don't know if he would have fought on, because you could see his timing after 3.5 years just wasn't there. It just wasn't there. And it was his last fight, obviously last fight in the UK at Manchester Arena. Again, the fans, they always turn up for Ricky Hatton. As I've said, I don't think we're ever going to see a British fighter have the fan base that Ricky Hatton had. I just don't think anyone can connect to a city or football club, whatever you want to call it, the way that Ricky Hatton did. You know, and he's kind of served as a blueprint for guys like Josh Warrington, Lee Ward, and Fabio Wardley, who have all fought in arenas, and many others who I've probably forgotten. And it's kind of become a sort of a roadmap for promoters, you know, and how to align them with a football club to replicate what Hatton did. But I just don't think anyone would do it. I mean, he had a special fan base. He gave many great nights. And I really think one thing about Ricky Hatton, when you look through his resume, he fought a lot of very good fighters, you know, Mayweather, Pacquiao, Costa Zoo, Luis Castillo. So he never ducked anyone, which is in today's day and age becoming more and more common. He always gave 110% in the ring. And he fought 3 minutes of every round. And I know a lot of people say, well, when you say stuff like, oh, he never left anything in the ring, it doesn't. No, not every fighter does that. You know, Hatton had a next level of giving everything in the ring than anyone else. And you could tell he was a real fighter. Even the Shevchenko fight, it wasn't just a paycheck for Ricky Hatton. He didn't come back to the ring to make money. After the fight, if you see how devastated he was, and that always stuck with me, and I always worried about Hatton. I wouldn't say I always worried about him, but it always stuck with me, that post-fight interview after he lost to Shevchenko, and he was saying things like, I'm not a failure, and you could really see the outpour of emotions, and you could see how devastated he was. And he wasn't a devastation because, oh, I can't get another big paycheck. It was a devastation because it was Hatton's identity. I think he wanted to become champion again. I think he wanted to redeem himself from what happened in the Manny Pacquiao fight. And it's, you know, sad that his career ended on the note it did against Shevchenko, because you always want to see a fighter, especially a fighter like Ricky Hatton, go out on a positive note. And, you know, even with that, though, he achieved so much in the sport. I mean, what is it, 4-time champion, Ring Magazine champion, 2-weight champion, Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year. We'll never see another transatlantic fight like Floyd Mayweather versus Ricky Hatton. It just won't happen. It was just such a clash between two styles, between an Englishman who was quietly confident and an sort of arrogant, flashy American. And it just brought together sort of two walks of life almost. You know, he was part of that. You know, we never would have had that 24/7 series without him. You know, the night against Costa Zoo when he overcame all the odds, you know, went out there and literally imposed his will on Costa Zoo. He didn't win that fight with skill. He won that with a level of determination and heart that you just very rarely see in the boxing ring. He beat a guy who was a lot more skilled than him and became the #1 fighter in his division. You know, he was able to even move up and win a world title at welterweight. So, sad to hear the news of Ricky Hatton and his passing. You know, he will always be missed. And he will always be remembered as one of the true greats of British boxing. And I think the best note to end it on is there will always and will always ever be one Ricky Hatton. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you liked the video. Please like it, comment, subscribe, share, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.